Okay, I reviewed this very briefly last year, a year ago today. Royalty Management Corp. Versus Lloyd's of London, an opinion in the United States Court of Appeals Ninth Circuit, decided December 22nd, 1998. Important is that 1998, December 22nd, 1998, was prior to September 11th, but was also prior to changes that happened to insurance law, and not only in the state of Texas, but insofar as I understand elsewhere. So this would be 1998. It would also be 6 years after, a little over 6 years after, certain changes that had happened in the European community. Now, it's important because while this is in the Ninth Circuit Court, the understanding, the Eastern District of California, the question becomes one of the relationship the state of California had in connection with Lloyd's of London, i.e., does the state of California use Lloyd's of London as a base for its state-based insurance policies and its state-based insurance code in manners comparable to Texas? So far, I've not found other states that did, but this may be, the reason I identified this opinion last year is because of my claim in consideration of the relationship between Lloyd's of London and the Texas Insurance Code at this time, and the conflict of interest I contend that this presents in connection with anti-BDS laws that were implemented in the state of Texas, but specifically their correlation with laws regarding sanctions on Iran and entities that are sanctioned because they're doing business with Iran. This was a topic of a report that I submitted to Scotland Yard in the late summer, early spring of 2018, for which I was provided a reference to the insurance fraud unit and a report number. Unfortunately, that whole email, including the information regarding my correspondence with Scotland Yard, ended up being dispossessed of me within a year, and I have no actual documentation of it. It was not a loss, is what I'm saying. And I bring this up because of here, this part, last paragraph. The district court also did not err in denying RMC's motion to strike Lloyd's answer or enter other sanctions for the alleged destruction of a claims file. The district court concluded that there was insufficient proof that Lloyd's intentionally destroyed the file. Rather, it found that the file had been lost. This is very important. Every single time I have tried to report my identity documents were stolen, including in filing a police report, I am told I can't, that it was just lost. And there's no way to file a police report when something's just lost. It's not true. They were actually stolen. I did file a report for a stolen passport in Chicago with the Chicago Police Department after contacting the passport office in downtown Chicago in July of 2016. My passport was stolen. I was refused any effort to recover it after I returned on site and requested it. I was kept at the guard station and was not allowed to enter in order to retrieve my passport. I reported it stolen with the Chicago Police Department in July of 2016. Since then, nobody has accepted a police report anytime my documents are stolen. I've had a number of documents stolen, including birth certificates, driver's license, and Texas identification cards, as well as my Chicago identification card. Nobody would accept the receipt of a report for a stolen document. The police repeatedly tell me, no, it's lost. It's not lost. They were stolen. But here's the other concern. Destruction of file. I've also attempted to contact the Texas Insurance Commission. All of my correspondence with the Texas Insurance Commission and all of my original reports, not only to Texas entities but also the federal entities, have been stolen. Were the files destroyed? Most of them had either printed files or printed and electronic files, including on multiple thumb drives in case something happened to one. All 11 thumb drives with that evidence and original documentation was stolen. But were the thumb drives themselves destroyed? Were the electronic documents on those thumb drives destroyed? Since I have been on the outside of my home here in Dallas since September of 2021, I've had at least two thumb drives stolen. But one was destroyed when I plugged it into the computer, and presumably there was some sort of electronic problem with the computer, and all of the information that was on that thumb drive was determined to be irrecoverable. Now, it is possible I may be able to access some sort of electronic program that can repair that specific thumb drive and recover the documents. But every time I plug it in, it says I need to reformat the thumb drive. I already know that means that will destroy all of the files that are already on that thumb drive. The other two thumb drives were stolen. They weren't lost. They were stolen. Were they destroyed? Was there destruction of the information on those thumb drives, including their categorization, either by date or by specific references identifying the kinds of evidence that they are? See, I have my own evidence collection process, the notations on the files, the names of the files. It doesn't matter to me if somebody else finds them offensive or finds them categorized in a way that doesn't meet with their specific bidding. I characterize them the way they do because there are certain kinds of evidence that pertain to certain references regarding my charges. I've been denied a legal evidence submissions process. Every single thing that was stolen is also evidence of the intent to steal it, insofar as it was stolen. Were those files destroyed? This makes a big difference, because then would Lloyd's be covered as some sort of carelessness by virtue of the way that the court identified this? Appropriate sanction for Lloyd's carelessness. Lloyd's carelessness is different legally than, say, Lloyd's negligence, including in consideration of commercial crime insurance. Pause. I also bring this up because it says, despite Royalty Management Corp's argument that the entire Ponzi scheme does not arise out of the initial loan, the language of the law sustained writer, quote, in any way involving any act, etc., committed, ... prior to the retroactive date, end quote, simply does not support RMC's contention that the scheme can be separated into several different transactions occurring at several different times, end quote. Please recall my original charges from February 23rd of 2022, including the first part. I was not able to file because the computers were offline that day, presumably as a weather-related event. But the other thing about a Ponzi scheme, including certain kinds of Ponzi schemes, is that the options for execution in the Ponzi scheme may involve original documentation that is allowed to be supplanted by forged or fraudulent documentation. The original documentation that, for instance, is submitted in a court proceeding and is entered as evidence is different than whatever documentation would be used once the scheme has been acquired through the judicial process and allowed to be repurposed or reappropriated by the state, including insofar as the state may bid the scheme out in order to execute it itself. This connects to a number of charges that go back, so far as I recall, specifically to 1989, but most specifically to 1999. Now, in consideration of that is the understanding that Lloyd's was allegedly absolved of any wrongdoing in connection with the determination that the file was not intentionally destroyed, quote, rather it found that the file had been lost, end quote. But it also identified it through carelessness. Now, Lloyd's would also be involved with considerations of risk management and risk insurance. Does Lloyd's get to set the terms of its own policies covering its own activities? Well, my understanding is that would be a conflict of interest. Who provides the insurance for Lloyd's? This is of concern because in July of 2019, a very, very noticeable thing happened. I was actually looking through the electronic site for Lloyd's of London, and specifically various programs that were being administered by Lloyd's of London, including one identified through another insurance company I understood was some form of subsidiary of Lloyd's. Half of the documentation connected to certain kinds of policy, a specific policy, was missing. All of the information that would have had a date, a term date, that would have had an anniversary on July 18th was not available on July 19th. But all of the electronic files for July 19th and thereafter were available. My understanding is that somebody had cut it in half and was risk leveraging one half against the other half. If I recall correctly, the dates of concern were July 18th and July 19th of 2020. Now, would that have been considered carelessness on the part of Lloyd's? If somebody so-called hacked the website and conveniently made all of the documents that were benchmarked for July 18th or before unavailable, but left all of the documents for July 19th and thereafter available, would that be considered carelessness on the part of Lloyd's? Is there a realistic or reasonable expectation that Lloyd's would have secured its own electronic documentation insofar as a policy at that level would have necessitated having documentation from both before and after that specific date? I contend Lloyd's did not know that the documents prior to July 19th were unavailable. I contend they were involved in some sort of risk scheme, almost as if it may have been a hedging strategy to determine who would get the ones before July 18th versus who would get the ones after July 19th or July 19th or thereafter. I got the ones from July 19th and thereafter. I put it on one of those thumb drives of evidence. That was stolen. Are all of the original documents from July 19, 2020 and thereafter connected to Lloyd's of London still in the original form they were in when they were acquired on the thumb drive they were acquired and put on? Where's that thumb drive? That thumb drive would have been one of 11 thumb drives that was in my locked filing cabinet in my closet in my room behind triple lock and key for a reason, and it was one of the thumb drives that was listed when I went to the court on September 21st of 2021 and identified in the motion I filed that day what had been stolen. Now, let me also indicate around that time a number of things were happening in 2019 as well as in 2020. In July of 2020, something very specific happened. Prior to July of 2020, there was an executive order that was available on the White House website. After July of 2020, that original executive order was changed. I made indications of it. I downloaded it and the information and also put it on another thumb drive. I contend that something happened that also correlated with backdating of reports from the Office of Comptroller of Currency regarding the semi-annual risk perspective, specific to short-term 5-year loans for the gas and oil sector, relative to understandings of the payment on principal for single-family home mortgages in the United States, including going back to 2017. The information in the OCC reports was altered after that time to reflect inaccurate information concerning the original time periods relative to the presentation of the information previously. Now, I did not review the 2017 semi-annual risk perspectives until early 2019. But when I attempted to review them again after July of 2020, the information that was in the earlier semi-annual risk perspective reports had been altered, including materially altered in manners that recapitulated the characterization of specifically the 5-year loans regarding the gas and oil sector, as well as payment on premium of single-family home mortgages, i.e., they were leaving the period for payment of interest and were entering the period of payment of premium at specific proportions. They also had a specific characterization in terms of the understanding of the market at the time that after July of 2020 had been altered. Part of the alterations that happened on that executive order also had to do with a certain kind of disparagement, including in consideration of the topic it covered relative to how information in prior executive orders had characterized topics of those executive orders. Now, I contend this is attributable to or connected to the information concerning the Lloyd's policy, specifically because of the kind of Lloyd's policy it was. It would not have appeared initially to be directly attributable to that specific policy, but in light of factors that occurred beginning in the autumn of 2019 and that were revisited in the autumn of 2020 in time for, among other things, The major storm that happened in Texas in February 2021, there is, if the evidence were reviewed, I could go to the specific pieces of evidence I'm talking about and show you exactly what I'm talking about in terms of that timeline. Here's the problem. The documentation on that claim was not lost. It was stolen. Was it also destroyed?